So let's dive into the content. So how has SEO changed? The machine's a lot smarter now. We need new signals to win the game. Authority means a lot more today. Relevance creates authority, and at the end of the day, your visitor is the priority number one. So when I say the machine is smarter, basically in the past, in the search engine optimization world, unfortunately, people in my field will have to do things to tell Google what particular pages should rank in the engines for specific queries. So you probably heard the term like keyword stuffing and putting lots of text content at the very top of a page, or things that really aren't conducive to good user experience, and people that come to the website and they're really having a hard time understanding the content that's there. But that's what gave Google the signals that would work. And so what's great is that Google's gotten a lot smarter about understanding what kind of content is on a page. And so you can start to write your content for users rather than for search engines, which really delivers a better user experience to people coming to the website. And you don't have to, and Google is still doing a great job of understanding what that content is and ranking it in their engine accordingly, rather than stuffing content full of keywords so when you read it, it doesn't really sound very good, but it worked in the past. And these days, Google understands that a lot better. So the other element, so that makes it a little bit easier when you're developing your content for your website. Now what's gotten more challenging because Google's smarter is that they can't rely on old signals as much to decide who should be ranking at the top of their engine. So they're looking at new signals like social signals and other relevancy elements that make it a little more difficult for search engine optimization folks to make sure that their websites are ranking at the top. And we'll dive into that in detail. And it's a mix of science and art. I think that in the past there was more science to it because Google was relatively stupid with their algorithm. And so you had to tell it a lot of, as an SEO, you had to tell it a lot of stuff that isn't really conducive to user experience. And today, Google's gotten a lot better at understanding what the content on your website is so that you don't have to over-optimize it to get the rankings that you're after. These days, engaging content is a must. So because of some of the new signals that Google's using with bounce rate and time on site and these social signals, really creating great content that people want to engage with and share and come back to and comment on is critical for winning the game in search engine optimization. And as I mentioned, the social signals are playing a critical role these days, and we'll dive into that in detail here. As I mentioned, new signals are needed to win. So the old signals, which you may have heard of, is getting links, which are equivalent to getting votes on the web. Google looks at links and says, we feel that this link is strong, and we're going to give a vote for that website for the particular terms associated with that website. Secondly, Google's always looked at content to understand what that content is about, and so those pages are relevant to a particular query, and they should show in the search engine. And then lastly, another old signal, which is still important today, is PageRank, which is ultimately the backbone of their algorithm, and it's essentially deciding how they decide which websites have authority. And so a page rank of 10 has the highest authority, and it's a 1 to 10 number. So over time, as you build out content and you get links from other websites, you build authority and you build page rank. And page rank helps Google sort through the massive amounts of data that they have to figure out who really should rank in their algorithm at the end of the day. So these old signals are still critical to today's search engine optimization game. So they're not less important. It's just that Google's now rolled in so many new signals that they're looking at that improves the quality of the results they're spitting out in the top 10 for a particular query. So to address some of those new signals, social media is key. So getting Facebook likes and shares, Google plus ones and Google shares, rel author is going to play in, Twitter retweets, and on and on. There's a lot more of them, but that just gives you some sense of what I'm talking about when I say social signals. And we'll talk about this in more detail. Also, new signals like authority. So if your brand is mentioned even in text, Google can detect that, and they're seeing that as an authority metric across the web. So even if you're, in the old days, if you're getting your brand name in links, and even today that plays an important role, but even in text, in some sort of article or reference, and they're looking at those brand names and what other keywords are around in that same piece of content with your brand name, and they're able to give authority metrics around specific search queries based on having your brand name seen across multiple websites. So just having your brand mentioned across the web via search or even via websites or social platforms is critical these days. And then lastly, engagement. I mentioned it earlier, but these signals, because Google has a lot more visibility to websites now with the use of Gmail and Google Chrome browser and even Google Analytics, they're tracking page speed, time on site, and bounce rate. So what we're seeing is that these new signals are playing in a much higher role than they did over the last 12 months even, and we're seeing them increase in being able to improve search results using these new signals. So all in all, you have to combine the old stuff with the new stuff to win in search engine optimization these days. And authority means more today. So what really determines authority? I mentioned it earlier, but with rel author, it's a new thing that Google's rolled out, and you may have seen it when you're doing search queries and you're seeing people's faces show up next to a search result. That's called rel author, and Google rolled it out because they need new metrics. They need things that can't be tricked with bots or software tools. They need real people to ensure that their results are good. And so one of the ways they do that is if you wrote a piece of content and you've established rel author, you can show that that content was originated by you, as well as it ties one person that can create authority around that person in a particular market over time, because that person may be writing for 16 different websites, but they're on those websites and the topics that they have rel author to are about the specific keywords within a marketplace. So you can see where that one person becomes very relevant and authoritative to a specific set of keywords and content. And so they've rolled this out, and it's a great opportunity for website owners to basically find somebody in the business that they want to make the face of the business. And you can put rel author on your own website because you've developed that content, and it really starts to drive authority for that person that you've created as the face of the business. And over time, you can grow that authority by getting that person showing up in more Google circles and all the things that are happening with Google Plus, and even from a click-through rate, you're seeing higher click-through rates on search results that have that face next to it. So over the next few months, as you're searching through Google, you're going to see a lot of these faces popping up with search results, and it's a direct indication that Google is putting more weight on pages that have rel author attached to them. So they have a real person that says, I created this content. The other thing that, because Google now has a lot of data from Chrome browser and Gmail and even Google Analytics, they're looking at direct traffic. So they know that you're a strong brand if you're getting people typing in your URL directly into a Chrome browser, or if they're typing in even search results around a brand name directly into the search engines. So they're looking at giving authority to websites that have a lot of direct traffic. So say for instance you run commercials on the TV, you're probably going to get a lot of direct traffic that just comes from the advertising you're doing offline. And Google is looking at that, saying these sites and the websites that are associated with these brands have higher authority than other folks that are brand new to the web and have no searches coming through, or no direct traffic coming through a browser. And because Google Chrome browser is one of the most used browsers out there these days, they've got a great data set to really determine what direct traffic's going to various websites. So they're using that to determine authority for search results. I mentioned it earlier, the co-citation, which really just means getting your brand name in content. So it doesn't necessarily mean that your brand name needs to be in a link back to your website, but getting your brand to show up in text and putting out press releases that mention your brand and getting mentioned across social networks that Also mention your brand is another way that Google's trying to understand which websites have more authority than others. If you have a strong brand and you're mentioned across the web and you're mentioned throughout the social networks, then Google's seeing that as an authority metric, and it just gives them more data to understand which websites should be ranking in the top 10 results for a particular search query. And then we'll dive into this. So I mentioned it earlier, but branded anchor text. So how many folks here understand what anchor text is? Okay, so I want to be clear about it. So anchor text is really, if you've ever clicked on a link or searched the web and even seen the titles that Google gives you to click on in their search results, the words that are in that link are the definition of that is anchor text. So it's the text that's in the actual link that you're clicking on. So in many cases it might be learn more, click here. In other cases, when it's in Google search results, it's the title of their website with some description of what they do, right? So anchor text is really what Google, at the core of their algorithm, looks at to understand what your website should be ranking for. And so over the years, Google's looked at links has been the core of how they would rank sites, right? So they're looking to see who on the internet is linking to you and what words are in that anchor text so that they know that your site should be ranking for that term. So hopefully that makes sense. And so what Google is really looking for these days is a high amount of branded anchor text. And what that means is that, if you look at links built to Macy's.com, a lot of them likely say Macy's, or they say Macy's furniture store, or they say Macy's.com, and they're referencing the brand itself. And so in the SEO world, if you're just heavily trying to optimize your website to rank in Google, you're likely not going to have very many branded mentions. You're just trying to, and so Google wants to see that you have lots of links coming to your website that mention your brand, that have your brand name in the actual link text. Because that's very natural. People will just link to your brand with the brand name. And that's been the case over the years with search, is that big brands, they tend to get links that have their brand name in them. And so Google's really rolled out a relevancy and authority metric that, if you got lots of links to your website using your brand name, you're going to gain much more authority than some folks that don't have a strong brand in the marketplace. And Google wants to push the big brands up higher. So relevancy creates authority. So to put this in perspective for you, the more relevant you become to your niche, the more authority the search engines will see, and your authority with those search engines will improve. So let's talk about this a little bit. So acquiring links from industry or topically related websites, like directories, associations, even citation websites, allows Google to understand that you're a part of a particular marketplace and that you bring authority to that marketplace. So if you have a particular directory that if you're an attorney and you go and get a directory listing there that links back to your website, your attorney website, then Google is seeing that, making you more relevant to that particular niche. And so I think that's the best way to understand it, is that if you want to create relevancy in a specific marketplace, you need to look first at the places that you potentially could get links that Google already understands these other sites are relevant to that particular topic, which drives your relevancy in that particular marketplace. I hope that makes sense. Secondly, it's critical, and it's really a great opportunity to organize your website content so that Google better understands it. So even though Google understands what the content on a particular page, they still have a pretty difficult time understanding the structure of a website. So you have the opportunity to create what we call silos, or creating, information that's very specific to a topic within your marketplace, and linking those pages together, like I mentioned, using anchor text that's relevant to those search queries that you want to rank for. And it allows Google to understand what your website is about, and that creates authority for a particular niche. So let me give you an example. So if you're selling baby toys and you have content on your website, maybe you have a category page about the baby toys. It's critical that if you write content about strollers and about different toys that babies love, that you link those articles back to that category page that's on your website, because that's how Google understand that group of content is connected with itself. And so it's about leveraging your content that you have and linking it correctly so that Google understands how relevant your site is to a particular market. So I think a good way to understand it too is if you look at a CNN.com or a large news network, it's not really about anything in particular. But then you go into very small niches where somebody's only selling baby toys. It's easy for Google, especially if that content has been siloed, to understand how relevant that website is to the baby toys market, right? So you have an opportunity with your web content and with internal linking to really give Google an authority metric within your marketplace that otherwise you don't have control over. So because you can control your website content and the links that go from those internal pages, you have a great opportunity to create silos and authority in the marketplace. And then lastly, with Rel Author, this is an opportunity for you to create conversation and relevancy in your market. So I think this, falling back to my description of what Rel Author earlier, if you're able to become a face to your market and you're putting out content that's about specific things, you're going to engage potential prospects and also your existing customer base to leave comments and create engagement, put out content that's relevant to the topics that you want to rank for in Google. And because you have Rel Author attached to it, that makes you more relevant to the space, which in turn equates to authority in Google's eyes. And lastly, your visitor's priority number one. That didn't used to be the case. You used to be able to rank websites that were horrible for user experience, but today, because of these new signals that Google is using to drive their search engine, you really, if you focus your energy on the user interface and interaction, you're going to win the game. So some of the key metrics here that Google's looking at is time on site, how long are they on your website, bounce rate, which is essentially how many people come to your website from a search result, and do they go back to Google when they leave that page. That's considered a bounce. And so you want to minimize the bounce. You want to drive people from search engines into your web pages and onto another web page, which eliminates the bounce. And so Google is saying, okay, if you're getting a high bounce rate, that means your content isn't relevant to what people are looking for. So I'm not going to rank you as high. So bounce rate is a key one that they're looking at these days. And they don't need Gmail, they don't need analytics, they don't need Chrome browser, any of that to get that data. They can get it from the search query and you clicking through to a specific result. And then lastly, page speed and page size. So Google wants to rank websites that pop like this because users are lazy and they're got 1,000 other things to do, and they can't wait for websites to load. And Google understands that. So Google wants to rank websites that load very quickly. So it's important to ensure that images are optimized and that web pages are loading very quickly.
What are good ranges for each of these KPIs?
So time on site, you want to be having folks hang out more than 2 minutes. Bounce rate, you want to get it below 50%. And page speed, it varies. It really varies on market, but the faster the better, because you can look at Google's own page speed tool and kind of get a perspective on where you stand from a page speed perspective. And at the end of the day, all these elements that you would be improving are going to improve leads and conversions. So at the end of the day, this is all in your best interest to do this. And it's a good thing that Google is finally able to measure this stuff so that they can actually rank websites that give a good user experience.